Hello. So, in this particular video, we are going to be looking into other components like the container. So there are two basic containers, and I want us to know what containers are used for. So containers are used to pad the content inside of them, and there are two container classes, which are the container and the container fluid. Now for the container we automatically have what we call responsive features, which means that the container is going to have some left and right padding and the margin. So they have left and right margin at this place. But for the container fluid, it is fluid. It is containing all the it doesn't give left and right margin to whatever thing that we have inside it. So you can read more about containers from here and their breakpoints. That is the responsiveness of containers. So for these extra small devices, container is going to have 100% width. For the small devices, it is going to have 540 pixels. And then for the medium devices, is going to have 720 pixels. And for the large devices, it's going to be um, from 992 pixels. Extra large devices is 1140 pixels, and extra large devices is going to be 1320 pixels and above, because if you look up here, you see it's greater than or equal to. So this is the responsiveness of containers, and as we said earlier, it is used to pad whatever content that you have within them. All right, let's look at them. Let's look at it. So let's create dot container, and within it let's have some h. Let's use the class of h1, and let's have hello world here. And this is what we have. We may not be able to see the container if we don't add a background. So let's add bg dash light. So let's have a white background, and here you see that what we have here, you can see how this thing is arranged. The hello world is placed within this particular container, and we have this left margin here, and we have this right margin here, but it doesn't have top margin. So by default, containers does not add top margin and bottom margin. What they do is they add left and right margin. Now let's see the responsiveness of containers. If we move from extra large devices to large devices to medium devices and all that, you see that this container will automatically give us this. But on small devices, I think I'll have to change my database theme. Let's use sorry, where I was supposed to place that BG color was not here. So I think we should leave what we have instead of having this class here. It's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be in the container, because what we want to see is the container. Okay, so you can see the original container here, and you can see in small devices there is no left and right margin. In bigger devices, in medium-sized devices, we begin to see the left and right margin, And if you scroll up, you still see the left and right margin. And this is because of the fact that containers are responsive. You can also make them more responsive by, indicating which place you want the container to be 100% full width. For instance, in the medium-sized devices now, we have the container centered, and this is left and right margins. So we can also make this container to be responsive on these bigger screen devices by um, appending something like container-md. And when we do container-md, you can see that the left and right margin has escaped. So from medium-sized devices to small devices, we will not have left and right margin. But if we move to large devices, we begin to see them again. If you want the left and right margin not to appear on large devices, we use dash LG, and this is on the this gives us the large devices. And if we move to extra large devices, you see the container we get the left and right margin again. So this is what we can do with a container. So we can move the container responsiveness to large, extra large, medium, small, extra large, and all that. So a lot we can do with that. You can see it in the documentation here. So right in the documentation here, you can see it. So we have container-sm to give extra small devices 100% width. And for the container-nd, you give 100% width to extra small and small devices. For LG, you give that to small, extra small, small, and medium, and then dash XL and dash XXL. So these are what you can do with that. Now let's look into container fluid. For the container fluid, let's have another container dot container dash fluid. Let's have hello world with H1, hello world here, true. So we have another hello world. So let's give this container a background of bg-warning, that is a yellow background, and let's see how responsive this will be. Now you can see that this doesn't change the alignment. It maintains 100% width. You can see it maintains 100% width, and this is what container fluid can do. Okay, so by default, container fluid is 100% in all devices. The width is 100% in all the devices. So we don't have to bother ourselves with that. All right, now let's look at margin and padding. So by default, we have left margin, right margin, top margin, and bottom margin. So this is left margin, this is right margin, bottom and top margin. So we can add margin to whatever we have here. So let's add margin. So to add margin, automatically what we know as margin is the white spaces Okay, so the padding is just to make it to add the same, it's just opposite of margin, adds weight to the inner element of an element. Okay, that's just how I can explain it. So to add margin, we use class M. So we use M for margin, and then we can give the margin a value. I think by default, Bootstrap utilizes 16 pixels for each margin. So if I use dash 1, it's going to move to 16 pixels. If I use dash 2, you can see that margin is being added throughout all the elements, less all the sides of this element. So we can see the margin was added here, added at the top, added here, and added here. That's margin because we are mentioning all round margin. Let's inspect this by right clicking and select inspect, and let's go to the computed. Let's select this and pick this one. You can see we have 8 margin here, we have 8 margin here, and we have 8 here, and we have 8 here. And this is because we set the margin to 2. So let's move it to, let's change this margin to -4 and see. You can see we have 24, 24, 24 all around, both left, right, top, and bottom. This is because we are just selecting margin. What about when we select a particular part of the margin? Let's say we want the margin at the top. So we can use MT for margin at the top. Now, if you look at this place has no margin, this has no margin. So this one we have 8 by default, but this is 24. Remember, if I remove T now, 24 applies to all the parts of the margin. But if I just add T, which is margin top, 24 will only appear at the top because this is the margin top. What about the margin bottom? 24 will appear only on the bottom because this is margin bottom. Now remember what I said before, Bootstrap has start and end. So start is the left and the end is the right. So to do margin right here, I don't actually need to bother myself with MR. What I will do is M E, which is margin at the end, and this is going to give me 24. So margin left, instead of using ML for the margin left, it doesn't work. So what we use is margin start, and you can see 24 here. So this is how we can set margin, all around margin, or pick which area of the margin that you want to, pick up and work with. All right, so we can set the maximum of 5 margin. Okay, so what we can see here. All right, the same thing applies to padding. If I want to pad this text, I will use P. So the class P is for padding, and then you can give it a value of P1, P2, P3, and so on. Now, we can still do the same thing that we did on the margin to the padding. So let's say the padding at the top, padding at the... Okay, so padding like this is overall padding. It applies to left, right, top, and bottom. So let's inspect it as well. So we see that so now we see that by default we have margin here. Okay, we have 8 margin, 8, sorry, padding, 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 and padding. We have the same value of padding throughout the every part or axis of this web, of this component. But if we select padding top, which is PT, this padding is going to only appear at the top. If we select padding bottom, this is going to only appear at the bottom. If we do padding end, which is PE, is going to only appear at the right. And then padding start, which is PS, is going to only appear at the left. So this is how we can set up the padding and the margin. But sometimes you may want to set up equal margin within each of the axes. Maybe top and bottom, you want them to have equal margin, and then left and right, you want them to have equal margin. In that case, we use the graphical axis. So we have the y-axis, which is vertical, and we have the horizontal axis, which is the x-axis. So the y-axis and the x-axis. So in this case, we can set up mx if we want this margin to be in the horizontal direction. It will be mx. So look at it, we have 48 here and 48 here without having any margin at the top here and the bottom. So you can see that this applies to just these two axes, the left and the right. If I want it at the top and bottom, it's going to be my. And if we look at this, you see 48, 48, top and bottom. This is y-axis. We can do the same thing on the padding. We can use px for the left and the right padding. You can see 8, 8 here. You can also change it to mpy to have it top and bottom here. So this is what we can do with margin and padding. Now let's work with image. How do we work with image on Bootstrap? So first of all, let's have our image with ing. Source is going to be images slash. So I already have some images. Let me use my image. So this is my image. I want to set the width of this image to let's say 120 pixels so that it will be within the screen. Okay, so this is my image, and if I want to work with this image, there are many classes that you can use to style up your image on Bootstrap. Let's look at the images. So the first class is the class thumbnail. So let's look at the class thumbnail, img thumbnail. So for my image, if I want it to be a thumbnail image, I'm going to give it a class of img, because this is an image dash thumbnail. And this is going to have a form of a frame, something like a frame that covers it. I can also round it by giving it rounded. If I want it to be rounded circle, rounded dash circle. And this is perfect for profile images or whatever, depending on what you want. So you can see that this becomes a rounded circle image. And we can do more. If you come here, you see the different types of image. We have rounded corner, we have circle, we have thumbnail. So these are some of the image classes. Now we can also align the images with float. So this time around, we are not saying img end or img start or img center. We use float to move left to right. So let's see how we can do that. So by default, this is going to be a left align image, but since we want to move it to the right, we can have float dash end, float end, and this image is going to move to the end, and we have float start, and this is going to move to the left. So the right is end and the left is start, and that is it. But we cannot have something like float center. It doesn't work because float does not recognize it. So how do we get this image to appear at the center? Let's see how we can do that from here. So to center the image, what we do is we set the margin as auto and set the display to block. Let's see how we can do that. So let's remove the float. So this time around, we set the margin in the X direction, that's left and right margin, as auto. And we also set the display to block. Once we do this, this image is going to appear at the center. No matter the size of the screen, it is going to remain at the center of the page. So this is how we can align the image to center, left and also right. So when you move to right, it's going to be float end, and then when you want to move to the left, it's going to be float start. I think that has been taken. Let's move to the next part of this lesson, which is going to be table. How do we implement tables? So to write a table, let's create a simple table with our normal HTML. So we can have some of these. So here we have the table in simple HTML, and this table has table head, and the table head is first name, last name, age. And then this is the table body, and it has these ones. Okay, so this is our table. Now in Bootstrap, once you use the class table, this is going to turn to a table. You can see how simple this is. This is going to turn to a table, and we can see the table. We can style this table even more, like adding color to the table, changing the default color of the body of the table and all that. So to do that, let's start with table dash dark. For black table, this is going to become a black table. If we want a red table, it's going to be table dash danger. This is going to be a red table. Table dash primary for a blue table. Table dash info light blue. Table dash warning yellow. Table dash success green. Okay, so these are some of the styling we can add to the table, and we can even be more creative. Instead of adding the table color here, let's say we want the table heading to have the colors, so we can add it to the table head here. We add the class table dash dark, and this dark is going to apply only on the table head. And you can see it makes sense actually, because everybody will now know that these ones that appear at the top are the header or heading of each of these table columns. So we can do more. with other classes of table, let's go to the W3 school and move to tables. So when you get there, you see the base class of table is table. And we have other ones like the table striped, which we give it a stripe color, a form of a striped coloring. With table border, we have table hover, such that when you hover around the table, when your cursor moves around the table, there is some kind of hover effect on the table. And then table dark and all that. So let's look at the table striped and table bordered and then table hover, and then we move to another thing. So let's see the table striped. So we can add table dash striped to this, and this gives it a form of a striped style. We can also use table hover to give it a hover effect. When the cursor moves, it gives it a hover effect. So these are some of the things that we can do. We also have table bordered. We can actually add it here, table dash bordered, to give the table a border like this. So this is all we can do with table. You can even get much more creative by trying to put up images inside the table, trying to put up forms inside the table. Okay, there are so many things that you can do with tables. Now let's create alerts. So alerts are used to, display important information to your users. Let's say somebody comes into your website and they are required to register on a particular course. So there should be a form of an alert. When they are making a mistake, you display an alert to tell them that they are making a mistake. When they have successfully registered, you also have to display a message to tell them that their action is successful. And that is what we use alert to do. Let's see how alerts look like. This is an alert. This is how alerts look like. And I know that most of you here might have seen something like this before in your websites, something like this, and it is dismissible. And all these things are called alerts. Now, to create an alert, we use the class alert. So we create dot alert. And the alert is going to take some h1 and all that. Now, this alert can have another subclasses, which is the alert heading. And alert heading is just like the most important information, like warning, like successful, like information, all those things. But the major thing I want you to take note of is this class called the class alert. And you can add different types of alert, like we can use alert danger to show that this action is dangerous. And then we can use alert success to show that this action is successful. We can use alert info to show that the action, that this is an important information, and so many other colors like alert primary, secondary, and so on, according to all the Bootstrap classes for color. Okay, so that's alert. Now, take for instance, we want the user, when they see this alert, that they should be able to kind of remove this alert from their device, dismiss the alert, or rather. Now, we can add a class that is called alert dismissible or dismissible. Let's see that on the W3 school. So we can see that we have a class called alert dismissible. Alert dismissible. So I'm going to copy the alert dismissible and we are going to place it in this alert class to have the alert dismissible. Now we must have to also create a button to dismiss this alert, and to do that we just create button and we give this button a class of btn dash close. And here we are seeing that this alert, we have this close button. So this button appears here, but the button is not functional. As you can see here, I am clicking on this button and it is not functional. Now, how do I make this button a functional button on this alert? So what I can do is to add an attribute, a Bootstrap attribute that is known as data dash bs dash dismiss equal to, then we set it as alert. All right, so this is how we can achieve this. Let's see. You can see that when I now click on the close button, the alert disappears. So this is how we can do an alert. Now for the last part of this episode, we are going to be looking into buttons. So to create a button, the base class for a button is .btn. Let's say register. This takes button effect, but it doesn't style it. If you want to style it, you can add btn dash which of the base classes that you want. The base color classes actually, like for blue button, you can have btn dash primary. For red button, you can have btn dash danger. For gray button, btn dash secondary. Yellow button, btn dash warning, and so on. So let's see btn dash danger, and we have a red button. So this button can also be, changed to bigger button or smaller button using btn-lg to change it to a bigger button, or btn-sm to change it to a smaller button. So these are some of the things we can do to a button. We can have other button types like the block button, and to achieve the block button of a thing, what we do is we can use the display grid .d dash grid and place our button. This button, I am going to Ctrl X to cut it and place it within the display grid, and it is going to be a block button. So this is how we can make this button even longer, or to cover the width of that component. We have other forms of button. Let's have this button. I can have .btn. Now this button, we have seen it previously in this video. The close button where you have this X form of close button. So we can use btn dash close for that type of button. And you can see here we have X that shows a closing button. So this is how we can actually give this button make it look like this. Okay, so these are all the buttons, that all the things that I wanted us to discuss on the button. The next thing that we are going to be discussing is the button groups. So this is all for this particular episode. In the next episode, we are going to be looking at other components like badges and navigation, navbar, collapse, and drop down. I'll see you in the next episode. Please make sure you subscribe and hit on the notification bell. Use the comment section to ask your questions if you have any difficulty. I'll see you in our next video. Take care.